They say every man remembers his wedding day forever, but billionaire tech mogul Chuka Diala will never forget his for a reason no one saw coming. On what should have been the most joyous day of his life, surrounded by Nigeria's elite and hundreds of guests in a venue that cost more than most homes, Chuka stood at the altar, looked into his bride's eyes, and began to cry. Not tears of joy, but something deeper, something that made his hands shake and his voice crack. His bride, Ngozi, squeezed his hand gently, thinking it was overwhelming happiness. His best man smiled nervously. 300 guests held their breath, cameras capturing every second. But then Chuka did something that would make headlines across Africa and beyond. He turned away from his bride, scanned the crowd of servers and catering staff lined against the back wall, and his eyes locked onto one woman. An older woman in a simple uniform, holding a water pitcher with trembling hands, and in that moment, Africa's youngest billionaire made a choice that would change everything. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand what happened that day, we need to go back 28 years to a dusty village in Enugu State, where a young boy named Chuka sat on the steps of a mud brick house, watching his parents pack their belongings into a rusted taxi. He was 7 years old, small for his age, with eyes that always seemed too serious for a child. His father, dressed in his only good shirt, avoided looking at him. His mother kissed his forehead quickly, her perfume cheap and overwhelming, and whispered words he would spend years trying to forget. "We're going to Lagos to make money, Chuka. We'll send for you soon. Be good for Mama Ada." But Chuka knew, even at 7, that soon might never come. The taxi pulled away, kicking up red dust that hung in the air like a question mark, and standing behind him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder, was Mama Ada, a widow in her 50s, who ran a small food stall at the village market. She wasn't his grandmother, wasn't related to him at all. She was simply a woman who saw a child being left behind and decided that wasn't acceptable. That night, she fed him jollof rice from her own plate and let him cry into her wrapper until he fell asleep. She never once made him feel like a burden, never treated him like charity. She just loved him, simply and completely, the way every child deserves to be loved. The years that followed were not easy, but they were filled with moments that money could never buy. Mama Ada would wake up at 4 in the morning to prepare food at her stall, and young Chuka would sit beside her, doing his homework by lamplight while she stirred pots of egusi soup and fried plantains. She couldn't afford to send him to expensive schools, but she made sure he went to the local primary school every single day, even when it meant going without new clothes herself. She taught him mathematics using beans and coins from her small wooden box, taught him to read using the tattered newspapers customers left behind, and taught him something far more valuable than any lesson in a classroom. She taught him that dignity didn't come from wealth, but from how you treated people when no one was watching. When he was 12, Chuka asked her why she never had children of her own, why she chose to raise someone else's abandoned son instead of remarrying and starting fresh. Mama Ada looked at him with those tired, gentle eyes and said something he would never forget. "Chuka, love is not about blood. Love is about choice. I chose you because when I looked at you that day, I saw a child who deserved a chance, and every day since, I choose you again." Those words planted seeds in his heart that would take years to fully grow, seeds that would eventually determine the kind of man he would become. Chuka was brilliant, there was no denying that. By the time he finished secondary school, he had won 3 regional mathematics competitions and earned a scholarship to study computer science at the University of Lagos. Mama Ada sold her gold wedding band, the only valuable thing she owned, to buy him a used laptop for his studies. He cried when he found out, but she waved away his tears with flour-dusted hands and told him it was an investment in his future, that one day he would do great things, and she was right. In his second year at university, Chuka created a mobile banking app designed for small businesses and street vendors, people like Mama Ada, who dealt mostly in cash and had no access to traditional banking. The app was simple, intuitive, and solved a problem millions of Nigerians faced every day. Within months, investors were calling. By his graduation, his startup had been valued at over 50 million naira. By the time he turned 28, he was being interviewed on CNN, and Forbes was calling him one of Africa's most promising young entrepreneurs. His company, DigiPay Solutions, had expanded to 12 African countries and was processing billions in transactions annually. Chuka moved from a shared student apartment to a penthouse in Ikoyi, drove cars that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, and attended parties where champagne flowed like water, and every conversation was about deals, investments, and the next big thing. And somewhere in all that success, in the rush of meetings and private jets and magazine covers, Chuka started to forget. Not consciously at first, but in small, devastating ways. He would tell himself he was too busy to visit the village, that he would go next month when things calmed down. Next month became next year. His phone calls to Mama Ada became shorter, less frequent. "I'm in a meeting, Mama. I'll call you back," became his most common phrase, but he rarely did. She would send him text messages written in broken English, asking how he was eating, reminding him to pray, telling him about the new children in the village she was helping. He would read them during board meetings and promise himself he would reply later, but later never seemed to come. When she sent him a letter for his 30th birthday, written carefully on lined paper in her shaky handwriting, telling him how proud she was and how much she missed him, he opened it in his car between appointments, felt a quick stab of guilt, and then got pulled into another conference call. The letter ended up in his glove compartment, forgotten beneath parking receipts and business cards. 2 years passed without him visiting her. 2 years of excuses, of, "I'm building an empire, Mama. I promise I'll come soon," of sending money to her bank account as if cash could replace presents. Then came Ngozi. She walked into his office for a business meeting, representing her father's investment firm, and Chuka forgot how to breathe. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was polished, confident, educated at Oxford, fluent in 5 languages. The kind of woman who belonged in his new world of champagne and charity galas. They started dating, and for the first time in years, Chuka felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Ngozi understood his ambitions, shared his vision for expansion into new markets, and most importantly, she came from a family that mattered. Her father was Senator Okafor, a man whose connections could open doors that even Chuka's money couldn't reach. When he proposed to her on a yacht off the coast of Dubai, she said yes before he even finished asking. The wedding planning began immediately, and it was spectacular. Ngozi wanted a ceremony that would be remembered, something that would make every society magazine, something that reflected their status. They booked the Eco Hotel's grand ballroom, hired the best caterers in Lagos, flew in flowers from Holland, and invited 1,200 guests. The budget exceeded 40 million naira, and Chuka approved every expense without flinching. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a statement, a declaration that he had arrived, that the abandoned boy from Enugu was now somebody important. But 3 months before the wedding, something happened that Chuka tried very hard to ignore. His assistant told him that an elderly woman had called the office 5 times that week, claiming to be his mother and saying she needed to speak with him urgently. Chuka felt ice water pour through his veins. He told his assistant there must be some mistake, that his mother had passed away years ago, which wasn't exactly a lie because the woman who gave birth to him might as well have been dead to him. But he knew who was calling. He knew it was Mama Ada, probably having heard about the wedding through someone in the village, probably wanting to congratulate him or ask if she could attend. And for reasons he couldn't quite explain even to himself, reasons that made him feel like the worst person alive, he told his assistant to block the number. He told himself he would reach out after the wedding, when things were less crazy, when he had time to think about how to navigate introducing his village mother to his society bride. Ngozi didn't know about Mama Ada, not really. She knew he had grown up poor, knew he had been raised by some relative in the village, But Chuka had kept the details vague. When she asked about his family, he talked about his biological parents who had abandoned him as if they were an unfortunate chapter he had closed, and moved the conversation to his accomplishments, his rise from nothing. He never mentioned the woman who had actually raised him, who had sacrificed her wedding band and her youth and her comfort so he could have a future. The wedding day arrived with perfect weather, clear blue skies, and a gentle breeze from the ocean. The hotel ballroom had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale, with thousands of white roses cascading from the ceiling, crystal chandeliers sparkling like stars, and tables set with gold-rimmed china that cost more per plate than most families spent on groceries in a month. The guest list read like a who's who of Nigerian high society: governors, business magnates, celebrities, diplomats, all dressed in their finest aso-ebi and designer suits. Chuka stood at the altar in a custom-made tuxedo, his groomsmen lined up beside him, and tried to convince himself that the hollow feeling in his chest was just nervousness. The church ceremony had been beautiful and emotional, and now they were at the reception for the traditional wedding celebration. Ngozi looked absolutely stunning in her coral lace ensemble, her makeup perfect, her smile radiant, everything a bride should be. But as Chuka looked out at the sea of faces, at all these important people who had come to celebrate with them, he felt completely alone. He realized with sudden, devastating clarity that not one person in this room actually knew him, the real him, the boy who had cried himself to sleep missing his parents, the teenager who had worked himself to exhaustion to make Mama Ada proud, the young man who had once believed that success meant having the power to help people, not just the power to impress them. The master of ceremonies called for the couple to have their first dance, and as Chuka took Ngozi's hand and led her to the center of the ballroom, he scanned the faces of the waiters and catering staff lined up along the walls, and that was when he saw her. Mama Ada, wearing a simple catering uniform that was too big for her thin frame, holding a pitcher of water with both hands because they were shaking so badly. She looked older than he remembered, much older, her hair completely gray now, her face lined with years of hard work and worry. But her eyes were the same, those gentle eyes that had looked at him with unconditional love when the whole world had turned away. And in that moment, as the music swelled and his bride smiled up at him and cameras flashed from every angle, something inside Chuka completely shattered. He tried to dance, tried to keep moving, but his feet felt like they were filled with lead. Tears started streaming down his face, and at first the guests oohed and ahed, thinking they were tears of joy, romantic tears from a groom overwhelmed by love. But Chuka's tears weren't gentle or happy. They were the kind of tears that come from a dam finally breaking, from years of guilt and shame and forgotten promises all crashing down at once. The music stopped. The room went silent except for the confused murmurs of 1,200 guests trying to figure out what was happening. Ngozi's smile faltered, her hand still in his, her eyes searching his face with growing alarm. Chuka's best man started to move toward him, probably thinking he was having some kind of breakdown, but Chuka held up a hand to stop him. And then, in front of everyone, senators and governors and business partners and society photographers, Chuka turned toward the back wall where the catering staff stood frozen, and he pointed directly at Mama Ada. His voice came out rough and broken, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "That woman there, the one holding the water pitcher, she's the reason I'm standing here today. Everything I am, everything I've built, it all started with her." The room erupted in confused whispers. People craned their necks to see who he was pointing at. Ngozi looked completely bewildered, her hand slipping from his as she tried to understand what was happening. But Chuka wasn't finished. He walked away from his bride, walked right through the middle of the ballroom with tears still streaming down his face, walked past tables full of important people. "Mama," he said, his voice breaking on the word. "Mama, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Mama Ada was crying too now, tears running down her weathered cheeks, the water pitcher nearly slipping from her hands before another waiter quickly took it. She looked down at Chuka, at this man she had raised from a terrified 7-year-old boy into someone the world called successful, and she shook her head. "You don't have to apologize, Chuka, I understand. You have a big life now, important things to do." But that just made Chuka cry harder, because even now, even after he had ignored her calls and blocked her number, and made her sneak into his wedding as a member of the catering staff just to see him, she was still making excuses for him, still choosing to see the best in him when he had shown her the worst. "No, Mama, you don't understand. I forgot everything you taught me. I became exactly the kind of person you raised me not to be. You sold your wedding band so I could have a laptop and I couldn't even answer your phone calls. You gave me everything, and I gave you nothing." The ballroom was dead silent now, everyone straining to hear this conversation that was too raw, too real for a celebration like this. Mama Ada pulled one hand free and cupped his face, the way she used to when he was a child, and had scraped his knee or come home crying from school. "Chuka, my son, success hasn't changed who you are. It just revealed what was already there. The question is, who do you want to be from now on?" Those words hit him like a physical blow, because they were exactly what he needed to hear. Chuka took a shaky breath, wiped his eyes, and slowly got to his feet. But he didn't let go of her hands. He turned to face the ballroom full of people, and when he spoke, his voice was stronger. "This woman's name is Mama Ada. When I was 7 years old, my parents abandoned me to chase money in Lagos. They left me on the steps of a house in Enugu, with nothing but a small bag of clothes and a promise that they would send for me soon. That promise never came. Mama Ada, this woman right here, found me sitting on those steps 3 days later, hungry and scared, and completely alone. She wasn't related to me. She had no obligation to me. She barely had enough money to feed herself. But she took me in anyway. She raised me, fed me, clothed me, sent me to school, and loved me when I had nothing and no one." You could hear a pin drop in that ballroom. Senator Okafor, Ngozi's father, was staring at Chuka with an expression he couldn't quite read. Ngozi herself looked completely stunned, tears beginning to form in her own eyes. "For years," Chuka continued, "Mama Ada sacrificed everything so I could have a future. And when I finally became successful, when I finally had the resources to pay her back, to honor her, to give her even a fraction of what she gave me, I disappeared. I stopped calling. I stopped visiting. I blocked her phone number because I was too ashamed to introduce her to people like you. I was ashamed of the woman who saved my life because she wasn't polished enough, wasn't educated enough, wasn't important enough for my new life. I convinced myself that sending money was enough, that financial support was the same as actual presence. But that's a lie people tell themselves to feel better about abandoning the people who matter most." He finally turned to look at Ngozi. "Ngozi, I'm sorry. I should have told you everything from the beginning. I should have been proud to tell you about Mama Ada, instead of treating her like a secret to be buried. She's not some embarrassing part of my past. She's the reason I have a present at all. And if you can't accept that, if your family can't accept that, then maybe we're making a mistake." The room exploded in gasps and whispers. This was not how billionaire weddings were supposed to go. But Chuka kept his eyes on Ngozi, waiting for her response, knowing that everything hinged on this moment. For a long few seconds, Ngozi just stood there, processing everything, her face cycling through emotions too quickly to name. Then she walked forward, her elaborate lace train rustling behind her, and Chuka braced himself for anger, for rejection, for the end of everything. Instead, Ngozi walked past him and stopped directly in front of Mama Ada. She took both of Mama Ada's hands in hers, looked into the older woman's eyes, and said in a voice that somehow carried through the entire silent ballroom, "Thank you for raising the man I fell in love with. I'm sorry I didn't know about you before, and I'm sorry you had to work at his wedding just to see him. That will never happen again." Then, to everyone's shock, Ngozi turned to the event coordinator and said in a voice that was pure steel, Please escort Mama Ada to my dressing room and help her change into something appropriate for the mother of the groom. She will be sitting at the head table with our families. Move my aunt if you need to make room." The ballroom erupted again, but this time with applause. Not the polite golf clap of society weddings, but real, thunderous applause from people who had just witnessed something genuine in a world that was usually all performance. Senator Okafor was clapping too, Chuka noticed with relief, and even some of the stuffiest-looking guests had tears in their eyes. 15 minutes later, Mama Ada emerged from the dressing room wearing a beautiful coral lace outfit that matched the bridal party's colors. She looked uncomfortable in the fancy clothes, kept tugging at the sleeves like they didn't quite fit right, but she also looked happy in a way that made Chuka's heart hurt. When they sat down at the head table, Mama Ada between Chuka and his mother-in-law, she whispered to him, "This is too much, Chuka. People are staring." He took her hand under the table and squeezed it. "Let them stare, Mama. Let them see exactly where I come from and who made me who I am." When it came time for speeches, Chuka stood up and spoke about Mama Ada, about the sacrifices she had made, about the lessons she had taught him that no business school could match. "Mama Ada taught me that wealth means nothing if you forget where you came from, that success is measured not by what you accumulate, but by what you give back, and that love is a choice you make every single day, not just when it's convenient." I forgot those lessons for a while. I let success turn me into someone I didn't recognize, someone who valued appearances over substance, who confused having money with having worth. But she never forgot me. Even when I ignored her calls, even when I pushed her away, she was still praying for me, still believing in me, still loving me the way she always had, unconditionally, completely, the way only a real mother can. By the time he finished speaking, there wasn't a dry eye at the head table. When Senator Okafor stood to give his speech, he surprised everyone. In our world, we often measure a man by his wealth, his connections, his accomplishments. But I've learned today that the true measure of a man is how he treats the people who lifted him up when he was down, how he honors his debts when everyone is watching, how he chooses love over pride. Madam, I don't know you, but I know what you did for my son-in-law. You took in a child who wasn't yours, raised him with nothing but love and determination, and shaped him into the kind of man my daughter chose to marry. For that, I thank you." 6 months later, Chuka and Ngozi moved Mama Ada from her small village room into a comfortable house in Lagos, not far from their own home. True to his word, Chuka established the Ada Foundation for Forgotten Mothers, a non-profit dedicated to supporting women who were raising children that weren't biologically theirs, but who they had chosen to love anyway. The foundation provided financial support, educational resources, health care, and, most importantly, recognition for women whose sacrifices usually went unnoticed. Mama Ada became the face of the foundation, traveling to villages across Nigeria to identify women who needed help and to tell her story of what one person's love can accomplish. The wedding incident, which could have been a disaster, instead became the defining moment of Chuka's public image. He was no longer just known as a young billionaire, he was known as the man who knelt before the woman who raised him, who chose love over pride, who publicly honored his debts when it would have been easier to keep pretending. When their first child was born, a daughter they named Ada after Mama Ada, Chuka held his baby girl and made a promise that he actually kept this time. He promised that his daughter would grow up knowing exactly where her family came from, knowing Mama Ada's story, understanding that greatness wasn't about wealth or status, but about character and love and the courage to do what's right, even when it's hard. Mama Ada lived to see little Ada grow into a bright, thoughtful child who called her Grandma without hesitation. She lived to see the Ada Foundation expand to 7 countries and help over 10,000 women. She lived to see Chuka become not just a successful businessman, but a good man, the kind of man she had always believed he could be. At her funeral years later, Chuka gave the eulogy without tears this time, though his voice was thick with emotion. "My mother, Mama Ada, taught me that love is not about blood or obligation or what you can get in return. Love is a choice, a daily decision to see someone's worth and to honor it with your actions. She chose me when she had every reason not to. She loved me when I had nothing to offer her. And even when I forgot her, even when I let success and pride make me into someone unrecognizable, she never stopped believing in the boy she had raised. He looked out at the massive crowd that had gathered to honor her. I failed her for a while. I let the world convince me that where I came from was something to hide, that the woman who raised me wasn't impressive enough for my new life. But on my wedding day, when I saw her standing there in a catering uniform, just trying to catch a glimpse of the boy she had raised, something inside me broke, or maybe it finally healed. I realized that I could have all the money in the world, all the success anyone could dream of, and still be completely lost if I forgot the hands that lifted me up. So this is what I want to say to everyone here, especially the young people who are chasing success, who are working hard to build something meaningful. Success will come if you're talented and dedicated and a little bit lucky, but success without character is just noise. Achievement without gratitude is just emptiness. You can climb as high as you want, but you'll never stand taller than the people who lifted you up. Remember them, honor them, choose them over and over again, especially when it's hard. As Chuka stood there that day, holding his daughter Ada's hand while his wife rested her head on his shoulder, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: complete peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because he had finally learned the lesson Mama Ada had been trying to teach him all along, that love and gratitude and remembering where you came from, those are the things that actually matter. Now, let me ask you something. If you were in Chuka's position, would you have had the courage to honor the person who raised you, even if it meant embarrassing yourself in front of everyone who mattered? Or would you have kept quiet, kept that part of your past hidden away? Think about the people in your own life who lifted you up when you were down, who believed in you when no one else did, who sacrificed for you without expecting anything in return. When was the last time you told them thank you? When was the last time you showed them they mattered? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories that remind us what really matters in life. Because at the end of the day, we're all just people trying to figure out how to love each other better. Don't forget where you came from. Don't forget the hands that lifted you. That's the real measure of success.